Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 4th of February. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date on your local weather forecast for your community or village around Alaska. You can do that by listening to Marine VHF, NOAA Weather Radio, or logging on to arh.noaa.gov or weather.gov/Alaska. Call us on the weather info line at 800-472-0391. And during the day and in between the shows of Alaska Weather, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. Use the hashtag AKwx TV as well on YouTube to get the entire broadcast here from our broadcast partner, Alaska Public. A lot going on around different parts of Alaska tonight. We're going to start in southeast, and this is probably where we're going to find some of the stronger winds in the next 24 to 48 hours. As we head into tonight, high winds will begin to develop out of the White Pass region through the Skagway region, Juneau and Douglas, all under the effects of strong Taku winds and drainage winds coming out of the White Pass region. As very intense high pressure setting up across the Yukon and very strong low pressures located down to the south. A very tight pressure gradient over all of southeastern Alaska, but these will be the places that feel it the worst. So let's start around the Juneau and Douglas regions. As we get into tomorrow, gusts will start to pick up. We'll see winds that could gust on the order of 60 to 90 miles per hour, probably talking about 70 miles an hour around the Juneau area, and downtown Juneau will likely be affected by this. So a high wind warning will be in effect for you tonight and into tomorrow and into Friday. We expect these winds not only to go on Thursday, but also on Friday. Those winds are also going to be a problem for the White Pass region and around Skagway, especially around White Pass. You're talking about winds that could gust upwards of 65 miles per hour. On top of that, if snow is falling and the winds are blowing at the same time, a rare combination could happen for southeastern Alaska, and blizzard conditions could be possible. That means poor visibility and strong winds for several hours. All that combined with falling snow and near whiteout conditions could prove to be a very tricky travel situation, if not a deadly one. So be very careful if you're planning travel up through the White Pass region. And again, high winds may affect marine and aviation operations around the Juneau area for Thursday and for Friday. And if that sounds bad, yeah, it is kind of going to be one of those stronger weather events there, and one that doesn't always set up quite this way. So a little bit on the unusual side, and one that is worth paying attention to and preparing for tonight. So if you have things that might be affected by the strong winds around the Juneau and Douglas regions, or might be impacted by perhaps blizzard conditions there around the White Pass region, tonight's the night to do something about that and get ready. Now up north, similar conditions there, but maybe some that are a little bit more accustomed to on the north slope. Blizzard watches posted for some of the orange shaded regions here for the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Winter storm watch posted for the Brooks Range on either side of the summits there. That does include Arctic Village. And dangerous wind chills will follow a frontal boundary sweeping through the north slope. Across the west, we're expecting those values to drop to 45, even 50 below or colder. Winter weather advisory for poor visibility there around the Barrow region as well. So a lot going on due to wind, due to cold, and the effects of that wind on the temperature as it feels to the human body. We do not have any wind chill advisories posted for South Central, but it should be noted that wind will be moving through a large part of South Central. As that colder air drains into southeast, we will have somewhat similar effects, just not on the magnitude that southeast is going to experience. And where it has been relatively cold but stable, the winds will start to pick up across South Central, and you will notice that wind chill in the coming days as well. Out across the Bering Sea, high pressure is still large and in charge there. You can see it drying up the air on the north side of the Aleutians. Here comes another wave of low pressure traveling from east to west, going around that southern periphery of high pressure, working its way northward, where perhaps once again it will become a stronger storm dropping in from the Arctic. As you look at the Bering Sea, you'll notice not a whole lot's going on across the south and western coast. We have northeasterly winds blowing off there, but in those places, do expect that the wind chill values will be dropping in the coming days as well. Places like the lower Kuskokwim Valley, around Grayling perhaps, and Aniak, you should expect considerably colder, feels-like conditions there. So if you have to be outside for any length of time, make sure that you are wearing appropriate layers and finding shelter quickly if you have to be outside for any length of time at all. Out across the North Pacific, you'll notice most of the weather is really moving away from Alaska, so let's turn our attention back to the Gulf of Alaska. And I'm going to switch sides here. I know for a lot of you, you think that's my side, and it usually is. But today I'm going to be over here because this is what's moving up towards southeastern Alaska. Out ahead of it, a lot of dry weather. Things have been fairly stable for the last several days. There's not a whole lot of precipitation, but as this low is moving up the eastern Gulf Coast, high pressure is dropping into the southern Yukon, and this is going to set up a pretty tight pressure gradient. The difference between pressure systems in the south and in the north is going to drag that wind right through White Pass and into the Lynn Canal, creating storm force winds in those areas and probably some pretty hefty gusts up and down some of the straits and channels there for southeast, including Clarence Strait and Chatham Strait. So be prepared, mariners especially, for some pretty choppy and rough conditions out at sea. And once again, if you're anchored or moored around Juneau and the Douglas Harbor areas, you probably want to make some extra special precautions there for some stronger than normal wind. Out across the interior, things are pretty quiet. Haven't seen a whole lot of precipitation, much less a whole lot of clouds, thanks to high pressure being in charge. But you don't see it really well on this picture. Colder air is dropping in once again across the Arctic coast. Let's look at the surface map, and you can see high pressure sitting right across the Barrow region at 1,035 millibars. One wave of low pressure has already passed through. That's what brought the poor conditions there across the Beaufort Seacoast by the last several afternoons. To the south, warmer air is lifting northward. You can see the shield of clouds moving up toward Haida Gwaii. Temperatures there were in the 40s late this afternoon and in the 30s for many parts of southeast. The ridge extends all the way out across the Bering Strait. To the south, we can see our waves of low pressure traveling across the North Pacific, just kind of grazing and slopping over the Aleutians, sometimes with a few rain showers there. That trend should continue for the southern Alaska Peninsula. Rain and snow showers may be possible for places just west of Dutch Harbor, Nikolsky, and into the central and western chain. Several waves of low pressure also working across the Alaska Range, some of those allowing a few clouds in from time to time, certainly some ice fog around the south central region the last few days there, but a lot of that will change now as the winds start to move. Expect more of a brisk wind moving through Cook Inlet. Copper River Basin may see some stronger gusts, and starting tonight you'll start to notice those winds coming up across parts of southeast. We expect to see some patchy areas of blowing and drifting snow across the north slope. That should really pick up though as we head into Thursday. Winter storm watches and blizzard warnings in effect there for parts of the, or blizzard watches I should say, for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast, and then wind chill advisories and warnings there for the northwestern Chukchi Seacoast as that cold front moves in and brings in a much stronger wind. Across the south in the central chain, it looks like a widespread area of rain. Most of that should be pretty light, and while it covers a large area, a lot of it really is going to be hit and miss. So a lot of that is not terribly well organized, and the bulk of the precipitation should be south of the chain. As we look at Thursday and southeast, though, your precipitation is moving in from southeast, and if that snow can meet up with some of the stronger winds across the northern sections of southeast, that's where that blizzard situation could develop there around White Pass and maybe even into Juneau. Many other areas will have some stronger winds and the potential of snow across Craig, Klawock, out across Hyder as well. High pressure up to the north should end that snowband fairly quickly, but the winds will be fairly strong throughout Thursday and once again into Friday. You can see conditions don't ease off a whole lot there. Blowing and drifting snow will be possible in some of those snowier conditions there from White Pass southward into Juneau. Low pressure there just west of Haida Gwaii and outside of Dixon Entrance at 968 millibars. Opposing high pressure at 1,016 millibars. On the north side of that, for our friends along the Arctic coast, that cold front is sweeping through fairly quickly, but with that comes a brisk wind in areas of snow and blowing snow and poor visibility. Therefore, your blizzard conditions there are possible in the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. The rest of south central and southwestern Alaska, breezy, colder with those wind chills there. Certainly across southwestern Alaska, we'll see a noticeable drop in the wind chill, or that feels like temperature there for you in places like Bethel and the surrounding YK villages out in the Norton Sound, even some wind across the Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue Sound. So really everybody's getting a taste of some of these stronger winds, the strongest of which will likely be across southeast and the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Let's talk temperatures there. This is what happened today. 20s and 30s for southeast, lower 40s for areas around Haida Gwaii, 38 in Sitka, 30 in Juneau. A nice day compared to probably what's coming. Prince William Sound, teens and 20s today, 14 in Anchorage after the sun came back out again, 34 in Homer, and temps were in the 20s around Seward by late afternoon. 13 below in Fairbanks, 22 below in Eagle, 29 below in Fort Yukon. Temps around the Brooks Range anywhere from 15 to 30 below. Fort Yukon was again about 29 below. The Arctic coast, and we saw AKwx at 29 below with Barrow. Right around 20 below there. Kotzebue, temperatures were holding around 5 below with 3 above in Shishmaref. Nome was showing 2. Unalakleet was 0. McGrath 2 below. Bethel 9 above. 16 around Nunivak Island. 27 below, 27 above, thankfully, and St. Lawrence Island around Gamble. Kodiak, looking at temps around the lower 40s today, 30s and 40s for the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint 43, False Pass and Cold Bay also in the lower 40s today. Mid-30s for the Pribilofs, 34 in St. Paul, and 30s and 40s for the central and western chain. Unalaska Dutch Harbor was 41. You'll drop down to about 40 tonight. Southwest holding in the single digits and low teens around Bristol Bay. 2 in Nome, 31 below in Barrow. My cold night for you. And 43 below in Fort Yukon. Fairbanks looking at 32 below, South Central in the single digits. Some areas might even drop below 0 tonight, so prepare for some colder weather. Teens and 20s for Prince William Sound, teens and 20s, coastal areas in the 30s for Southeast with high temperatures tomorrow back in the 20s and 30s. Count on it feeling colder though with wind coming in. 20s for South Central. Looks like most areas in the interior will still be sub-0, anywhere from 10 to 20 below. Fort Yukon, one of the colder spots, as well as Arctic Village. 10 below in Barrow, Kaktovik, 18 below, 18 above in Nome, and Southwest mostly in the teens and 20s. Again, with a wind chill, though, that will make that feel probably 20 to 30 degrees colder at times. 30s and 40s for the Alaska Peninsula and the chain in the lower 40s with Kodiak at 36. Flying weather shows IFR conditions developing around the Chukchi Seacoast, MVFR for a large part of the Gulf, and really most of the chain in the Alaska Peninsula. Your pass conditions show VFR for Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will say VFR, and most of the Alaska range should be okay, but I do expect some choppier turbulence type conditions to develop in the next couple days. Windy and Isabel Pass also VFR. Mentasta Pass will say VFR. Tanita Pass also looking clear. Same goes for Portage Pass throughout the day. And Chilkoot and White Pass will see worsening conditions, especially in White Pass as we get into the afternoon and into Friday. The surface freezing levels show the cold air is still winning at the surface, but warmer air is lifting northward again, bringing a threat of some snow to southern parts of Southeast. 2,000-foot freezing line over the southern parts of the Alaska Peninsula. Below 10,000 feet, you might run into some light to isolated moderate icing across the Chukchi Seacoast, and above 8,000 feet for southern parts of Southeast into the Dixon Entrance, and way out across the central and western chain, also some light isolated icing potential there. The jet stream bringing in a northwesterly flow will encourage the flow of much colder air across the interior and into south central, also helping to set up the situation in southeast for that strong pressure gradient wind. Also look for the main storm track to remain well south of Alaska at this time. At 9,000 feet, you can see mainly a northerly flow working across Alaska. Low pressure just west of Haida Gwaii. Stronger winds moving in from the north and east at this level between 20 and 35 knots. And east and northeasterly winds working across west and southwestern Alaska, 25 to 40 knots. Similar conditions at 3,000 feet. Those north and easterly winds start to pick up a little bit more out toward the YK. Low pressures south of Kiska, bringing in southeasterly flow through the North Pacific at 20 to 25 knots, and stronger winds already working their way at this level across southeast from the east and southeast at 40 to 45 knots. Over Kodiak Island, those winds are around 20 knots from the north and east. Turbulence potential, then, we're really going to focus on southeastern Alaska below 6,000 feet. You should plan for isolated severe, if not occasional severe, up and down the inner channels, especially in the northern half of southeast tomorrow and over Juneau. Once again, marine and aviation operations may be impacted as we head into Thursday and for Friday. Southwest, also below 5,000 feet, occasional moderate will be possible. That's a look at your aviation forecast. In just a few minutes, Mike Ottenwiller will be back with your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Like most people, Dennis Beam and his daughter Kelly weren't worried about the cold the night their car slid into a ditch in the middle of a blizzard.
I wasn't really too concerned. I'd been stuck before and it wasn't all that deep. But the wind kept picking up and the storm just didn't let up. I was getting wet trying to get the car out, but it was no good, so I decided to wait. About 9 that morning, we'd been stuck about 4 hours. The storm wasn't stopping at all, and we were really getting cold. I figured nothing was going to happen up there on a country road. No help, period. So I decided to go for help. You stay warm and you stay in the car no matter what, okay?
Okay.
Everything's going to be okay. I love you.
Love you too.
Okay, now you be good. Right there. Right there, okay?
I didn't want to be left alone, but Dad said he'd be back for me. He promised.
Leaving Kelly was like leaving my heart behind, and I didn't know when I'd get it back. I couldn't see a thing. It was freezing. My eyes were frozen shut. I had ice all over my feet, but I had to keep going. There was nothing else to do.
Help! Please, this is Kelly B. We had a CB radio in the car, so I tried to call for help. Help! But no one answered. I kept wondering where Daddy was. Can you hear me?
It took me 3 hours to get to a house, and it was literally my last ounce of energy. My feet were black, parts of my face were frozen, but that wasn't my main concern. Kelly was still in that car, and the police said they couldn't get to her until the storm stopped, and there was nothing I could do.
After it got dark, I didn't know what had happened. I couldn't stop thinking about Dad. I had 3 pieces of candy, but I wanted to save them for Dad because I thought he'd be hungry when he came back.
After 10 hours, I didn't know what to think. She'd been alone so long. There was a lot of worry time then. Yeah. A lot of thinking time.
Kelly's okay, I think. I had to leave her in the car.
Sometimes in the car, I dream that Daddy might not come back.
About 1 the next morning, the storm
thank you.
broke, and the police headed off to get Kelly.
Have you heard anything?
Nothing yet.
All I could think was that after 19 hours, who knows, she'd been there so long with no heat. I kept hoping I'd put enough emphasis on staying in that car until I got back.
When the rescuers came, I asked if Dad was okay. He said yeah. I was glad, because it was all over and Dad was okay.
It's for you?
Yes. Thank God.
And then the call came. She was
Where's she
okay.
Is she
My
okay?
whole world lit up then.
Oh, thank God. Thank you very much. Yes. Okay. She's okay.
Kelly suffered only mild symptoms of hypothermia. As the snow buried the car, it insulated and protected her from the severe cold and high wind. Dennis was badly frostbitten because of his walk through the snow. Which of the two had been in the most danger? Without a doubt, Dennis. As soon as he left the car, he put himself in tremendous jeopardy. Neither father or daughter were well prepared for the extreme weather conditions they encountered. A few carefully chosen items would have given them the extra margin of safety they needed. One blanket wasn't enough. Sleeping bags would have been better. Extra clothing would have been extremely welcome after Dennis got wet. Matches and candles. A flashlight with extra batteries. Signal flares. High-calorie, non-perishable food. A shovel and a sack of sand, ashes, or even kitty litter. And a first aid kit. These are examples of items you need. Winter travel is serious business, and you must be prepared for it. Your car should be in good working order. Know the route you plan to take, and tell somebody else where you're going and when you plan to arrive. Check the latest weather information before you leave. The National Weather Service provides up-to-the-minute weather forecasts and can predict most severe storms. If the people in our next story had listened to the weather forecast, they would be alive today. Traveling back to school, 2 students drove directly into a severe winter storm. They had a 4-wheel drive vehicle and were sure they could get through. First, they came upon a roadblock warning travelers to pull off the highway. They went around it. Several miles further, they got stuck in a large snowdrift directly under a bridge. They tried to dig out, but it was hopeless. Soaking wet, they changed clothes. Stuck in the snowdrift, isolated from help, they decided to sit it out. Wait until someone came along and found them. The next morning, someone did. They were dead. They had made 2 fatal mistakes 1, traveling in the face of deteriorating weather conditions, and 2, ignoring a police roadblock. Ironically, it appeared that after they got stuck, they did everything right. They started the car every so often to keep warm. They changed into dry clothing after getting wet trying to dig out. And they didn't abandon their car. However, stuck under the bridge, the wind trapped fatal carbon monoxide fumes around and inside the car. A freak accident? Maybe. But they really died because they didn't use common sense. After those first 2 mistakes, every other decision only compounded their danger. Ed and Paul Miluski. Dennis and Kelly Beam could have been winter storm fatalities. The 2 students were. Being prepared for winter emergencies will always better your odds in a snowstorm. So will using good judgment and common sense. These guidelines, if you get caught in a severe snowstorm, will help you survive the cold.
And welcome back to our show. Hope you enjoyed that segment. It's fairly fitting as we're going to be talking about some cold and some stronger winds in this portion of the marine segment and as a recap of our surface maps. Taking you through the southeast portion of the state, you can see here our stronger winds starting right out of Lynn Canal. North winds 60 knots, storm force winds up there with higher gusts possible. Seas about 12 feet and we'll be building on those. Down a little bit closer towards Stevens Passage and then Clarence Strait, looking from north to northeast, 45 to 30 knots and seas about 6 to 9 feet. Out towards the Gulf, again, those higher gusts will be the predominant story here through Chatham Strait and Cross Sound. Looking for northeast flow, 40 to 50 knots, storm force winds towards the northeastern Gulf and seas running about 10 to 14 feet as you get a little bit farther towards the north. On into Friday then, not a whole lot of change in these conditions. The strong winds will remain in place for Lynn Canal, 60 knots still out of the north, and those seas are all the way up to 16 feet now, and higher gusts expected in that area. A little bit closer towards Stevens Passage, north winds 50 knots, and then southeast 35 gale force winds there down towards the Dixon entrance. Out towards the Gulf, we do see 45 knots out of the northeast, again with those higher gusts through all the inner passageways, starting to blow a little bit out towards the Gulf of Alaska. And then 35 knots out of the north, seas running between 16 and 19 feet out over the open waters. Towards south central then, starting up in Cook Inlet, we're looking for north winds at about 20 knots, 4 to 6 feet. Similar conditions for Prince William Sound, north winds 20 knots, 4 feet, and higher gusts again with that cold air bottled up out of bays and passes. We'll see some stronger gusts in that area as well. 25 to 20 knots northeast to northerly flow towards Kodiak Island. Seas in that area will be between 6 and 7 feet. And then back towards Cook Inlet, we'll look for north winds 30 knots, becoming northeast as you get towards Shelikof Strait, seas between 8 and 12 feet. On Friday for South Central, looking up towards Cook Inlet, 25 knots with seas 8 feet. Winds will be out of the north. Similar conditions over towards Prince William Sound. North winds 20 knots. Those gusts will continue through Friday and seas about 4 feet. Out over the Gulf, north to northeast winds 25 to 35 knots. And we expect seas to be on the order of 8 to 12 feet for the open waters. And then a little bit in the more sheltered areas of Shelikof Strait towards western Barren Islands, 30 to 35 knots out of the north, seas between 10 and 13 feet. Towards the Alaska Peninsula for Thursday, looking for north to northeast winds, becoming easterly south of King Cove, 20 to 25 knots. North of the chain, expecting seas about 7 feet, and then south of the peninsula, between 7 and 13 feet. On Friday, not a whole lot of change. Seas coming down a little bit, but winds generally north to northeast, 20 to 25 knots, and seas 7 to 8 feet. Out over the western Aleutians, we're looking for east to northeast flow, generally between 25 and 35 knots, seas anywhere between 11 and 14 feet. And on Friday, dropping the winds and the seas a little bit, but keeping that northeast easterly direction, looking for speeds 20 to 25, even 30 knots at times, seas around 7 to 11 feet. Towards the west coast, northeast flow is going to continue coming around that area of high pressure, and the seas will be between 4 and 8 feet right off the ice pack, building to 9 feet as you get towards the Pribilof Islands. Freezing spray will once again be a problem in this area. And similar story on into Friday, northeast and north winds 25 to 30 knots, and expect freezing spray to continue with seas between 4 up to 11 feet near the Pribilofs. As we get towards the Arctic coast, expecting a little bit more variable conditions, south to southeast winds becoming more south and then westerly over towards the northeastern portion of the state, anywhere between 10 and 20 knots for this region. On into Friday then for the Arctic coast, expect winds to swing around to the north, 20 to 25 knots off the northwest coast, and then 20 to 30 knots from the northwest and then becoming westerly over towards Kaktovik. So recapping tonight's weather, I'll switch over to this side as well, as we can see that strong area of low pressure starting to work its way northward and that gradient starting to tighten up. This will be the main story into the next couple days. We also are looking for that high pressure and those gustier winds over the Arctic coast to create wind chill advisories and potential for blizzard-like conditions in the next 36 hours up there as well. On into Thursday, that stronger pressure gradient continues to build in as snow starts to blow. And then into Friday, that low pressure is right over the Juneau area. Expect strong winds and snow through those areas. Have a great...
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.